Greetings once again, Leica fans and Leica fam. Antonio Benedetto, product specialist for Leica Camera USA, here once again for another edition of Leica Conversations. Thank you all so much for joining us once more. We've got another amazing program in store for you, and I am always and forever and now very excited for this one. So we've got a really special program today. And good news for you guys, you only have to hear me for another moment because I have a guest host here to greet you as well as our guest. So today we are joined by Alastair Jolly of SmugMug as our guest host, and our guest of honor, Amelia Davis, who is the owner of the Jim Marshall estate and longtime assistant and personal friend to Jim Marshall. If you've watched our Stay Home with Leica programs, you may recognize a familiar face. I would encourage you, if you didn't check out that program, to check it out on YouTube, and it's full length. It's very long. We went through lots of pictures. So without further ado, let's welcome our guests. Hello, Alastair and Amelia. Welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Antonio. Hi, everybody. Hi, Amelia.
Oh, hi.
That's good. It's such an honor to be here, Antonio. Thank you so much for your invitation.
No problem. I'm gonna step away so that you guys can have the conversation, and maybe I'll join you a bit at the end. But thanks, everyone. I think you're all in for a treat. I know I'm excited.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Antonio. It is a real treat. We spend our lives at SmugMug+Flickr helping people with our product to tell stories with their photography. And Amelia, you know, I'm so excited to have this conversation with you and tell a little bit deeper story about Jim Marshall and about some of the photographs that people aren't so familiar with. So thank you for joining today.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's always fun for me to share another side of Jim Marshall that people may not know. Show the complexity of this mad genius of a photographer.
Well, I'm a huge fan of Jim's work, so it's an honor for us at SmugMug+Flickr, but it's a deep personal honor for me to have this conversation live with you. I've had the pleasure of having several conversations with you about Jim's work, and I think you know how much of a fan I am of his work. I thought we would start today by having a look at not the images we're actually here to talk about, but just setting the scene with some of the iconic images that people will be familiar with Jim more than the images we're going to show. For instance, you don't get more iconic than the Beatles, right?
Yeah, their last live concert in Candlestick Park in San Francisco, 1966.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that they gave up because they couldn't hear themselves play. Another iconic image here. Tell us a little bit about this one.
This is Peter Frampton, and it's Day on the Green in Oakland, California. And it just says it all. I mean, it's just such an amazing photograph. And Peter Frampton said, "I wish I had a do-over so my legs were straight."
So he could do his splits better.
Yeah.
These are images that I grew up with. This image particularly, this is, John Coltrane and Wes Montgomery, and this image, to me, I've said it to you before, I think this may be one of the best live music images ever taken. It just is an incredible image on so many different levels. The angles in the image, the exposure, the really difficult circumstances in which Jim had to take this image. It's so iconic. I love this one so much.
Yeah, me too. That's just a beautiful shot. And you feel like you're on stage with them, just playing along. It's intimate, and technically it's amazing.
Yeah, technically incredible, and puts you right there in that moment. You feel like you're at the front of the stage and you can hear the music. I just, this image speaks to me in so many different ways, and it's always a delight to see that one on screen and in person. Love that image. Now this one is very different from how we typically see this man photographed. Tell us a little bit about the backstory here.
Well, this is when Jim knew Miles Davis for a while, which was great. So he had access, but Miles loved to box, and here he is at Newman's Gym in San Francisco in 1971. And I never noticed before until just recently. If you look closely at the photograph, Miles is not sitting on a stool. he's literally leaning against the ropes and getting madder and madder at Jim as he starts sliding down. But
telling Jim to hurry up because he's kind of squatting almost against the ropes. I didn't notice that until you mentioned it to me the other day. You just assume he's sitting on a stool in the corner, but a very, very unique image of Miles there. Incredible.
And Miles would always tell his sparring partners, don't hit me in the mouth tonight, I gotta play.
Now, I have always wanted to be a rock star guitar player, and as a very young boy, I remember seeing this image and thinking one day I'm going to be good enough that I can set fire to my guitar on stage. It is, of course, Jimi Hendrix. At that point in my life, I never realized that one day I'd be talking to you about the very man that took these photographs. It's really incredible for me to be looking at these photographs, but this one, I'm sure everybody recognizes this image. It's so iconic.
It really is.
Yeah, doesn't need any words.
No.
Now, this image, Amelia, my father had this image in the house. It's on an album cover of Johnny Cash, and I remember it was always a hot topic in the house because as a very young kid, I was not allowed to look at the naughty man with the, flipping the bird. But again, just the most iconic image of Johnny Cash. I think you once told me this is one of the most copied photographs in the world.
It's one of the most ripped off photos in the whole world. Yeah. And as Jim said, because he would sue everybody who used it illegally, it was his cash cow.
His cash cow, yeah. He probably made more money out of the litigation than he made from the actual photograph itself, right?
He did, but one of the fun things about this one too is if you look closely, Mama Maybelle Carter is in the background. So that's June Carter's mother. So what John Carter Cash would always say is one of the most rebellious photographs in the history of music has not only my father, but my grandma. It's fun.
Incredible. And this was taken was this Folsom Prison?
This was Folsom Prison, yeah.
And this was taken specifically for the warden, I believe, right?
It was, Jim. There's varying stories, but everybody has a different story. But Jim's story to me, which I'm going by, is, yes, this was during sound check, and Jim said, let's give one to the warden, and Johnny Cash put him, because he was very much for prisoner reform. And so the whole reason he did the live concerts at Folsom and then San Quentin was to shine a light on prisoner reform. So, yeah,
as I say, an image I've grown up with. I'm sure many of you watching today have grown up with that image, and incredible to be talking to you about the very man that took that photograph. This image is going to be a very nice segue into the main images that we want to talk about today. Tell us a little bit about this image of this probably rather unknown young man at the time. Right?
Young Joan Baez and an even younger Bob Dylan. And this was at Newport Folk Festival in 1963. So this is really when Joan Baez introduced Bob Dylan to the world. And it was because she said, this guy's great, that he then was accepted. And he did 2 duets at Newport Folk Festival in that year. One with Joan, and then when he played himself, Joan came and did a duet with Bob Dylan on stage. So but to me, it's amazing because they're just so young. Really young.
Yeah, we're getting older by the moment, unfortunately. So these are some of the images that we're very familiar with and set the scene of what Jim is best known for. But we know that we want to use this conversation to let people know the deeper work that Jim did, because he wasn't just a photographer of musicians and live music. That was just part of this kind of curious spirit he had, right?
Yeah, Jim, I always like to say Jim had a very curious eye. So he always called himself a photojournalist. And he said, I'm a reporter with a camera, because he photographed literally everything. So if he was there for the music, it wouldn't just be a photo of the music. He would take his photographs, and then when the music ended and all the photographers would go away, Jim would just keep rolling and taking pictures with his camera of everything that was happening around that as well. And so he was able to chronicle so many things. And And I think the reason we came up with the title that we did is because, yes, most of the time, you know, a lot of times, especially with the photographs we're going to be showing you, Jim did go for the music, but he ultimately ended up staying for the history and capturing that history on his Leica camera. And I think we're really lucky that he did that. But that was just a part of Jim, and that's what made him stand out, I think, from some other photographers, is that he was always looking. He was always curious and always wanted to document and see what was going on. And I think that was one of his secrets as a photographer.
Yeah, and we're going to reveal some of those secrets, because he really was, in many ways, a great photojournalist, a great documentarian, and almost approached even his musical work a bit like street photography. You know, just this kind of fly in the wall that had this curious eye that wanted to document everything that was going on. And, you know, I've spent my life really only knowing those iconic images, some of which we've seen earlier. But now, through the book that you released and through the stories that you're telling about Jim and having these type of conversations, we're beginning to realize just the incredible, history that Jim has captured, and the depth of the historical documents he has now with his images. It's just mind-blowing, some of it.
Yeah, and it's very timely now as well, and that's why we're talking about it now, because a lot of these images, were taken 60 years ago that we'll be showing you, and we are today in the United States facing a lot of the same issues. So it is so relevant, and I think it's important to share these images so that people can look back at the past and see what people did and kind of bring that into this time now, especially a lot of younger voters who feel kind of helpless, I think, and as if they don't have a say. You do have a say, and you can use your voice to speak truth to power, and you can also use photography as that voice as well. And that's what's so incredible about photography in general, is that it tells the truth. And I mean, today it's different when you have digital cameras and you can pop things in Photoshop, but when Jim was doing this and documenting these pieces of history, he had an all manual Leica, an M4. And so it told the truth, that what he captured was what you saw. And a lot of times in photographs, I think they can either be beautiful and emotional and bring up a smell or something, but they can also be very difficult to look at. And it can show brutality and evil, and chaos. But that's important as well. And that's why Jim took his camera and, photographed these instances, because we need to look at them. We can't look away. You have to look at them and start a conversation. And that's how we dialogue, and that's how we learn to get along. And as I said, that's exactly what's happening right now. So hopefully we can look back at the past and look at photographs and really start talking with each other.
Yeah, and these images help us see that, we've been in dark places before, and they've shown us that there is a way forward and there's progress that can be made. It's a shame that we have to, be considering so much progress needed at this stage again, but these images are that evidence that, we've been here and moved forward with these. So we've got 5 images that we're going to look at today. Tell us, before we go a little bit deeper into them, tell us the foundation of what you're going to do with these 5 images, and about the print sale that's going to happen.
So these are 5 images that I chose that Jim didn't print during his lifetime. And they're just as iconic as any of the ones Jim did print during his lifetime. And we're lucky that Jim had such a vast archive so that we can show you things that a lot of people haven't seen. And this is really from the photos we'll see are from 1963 and 1964. And it deals with a time when in the US there was still a lot of segregation going on. It wasn't until 1964 that the Civil Rights Act had been passed. Mm-hmm. And that's when, they ended segregation in public places. So this particular photo, which is 1963, the Newport Folk Festival, is really when segregation was happening before it was, tried to be stopped in 1964. But what's so special about this time is that it was people of different colors, backgrounds coming together and using music as a tool to really talk about what was going on at that time. Mm-hmm. And that's so important. And the Newport Folk Festival, as well as some of the jazz festivals, really was a place where Blacks and whites felt comfortable mingling together because they knew they were coming together for the universal language of music, and they would not be hassled by the police and, taken away and said, "You're colored, you don't belong here." So I think it really shows the unity of people coming together for a common topic or goal or whatever you'd like to call it.
Yeah. And in this particular image, the two festivals were happening at the same time, the Jazz Festival, the Folk Festival, and it was the springboard and to have a practice for the March on Washington, correct?
Right. And we didn't really realize that until we went through the proof sheets and we saw that, oh my God, this is, and we did we checked it. Mm-hmm. And we found out that Jim had, I think he's the only photographer that has photographed this happening. But yes, it was in the town of Newport, where they had the Newport Folk Festival. They did a trial run for the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, which was the very next month. So this was July. March on Washington was in August. And the reason they used the town of Newport is because it was small and contained, and they could really do a dry run through it and see what worked and what didn't. And that's what this is that we're seeing is Joan Baez, and next to her is Cordell Regan, who was the founding member and lead singer of the Freedom Singers. Mm-hmm. He was also very involved with SNCC, which was the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And they really devoted themselves to nonviolence and talking about these different, things that were going on between Blacks and whites and the segregation and the, so what they did was they talked about it through their music. So a lot of it was protest music and a lot of it was telling a tale and a story. So Cordell Regan is a big figure in the civil rights movement, next to Joan Baez. But what I love about this as well is that there's this little boy in a helmet there. Yep. And we've talked a lot about, in other talks I've done about Jim, is he never had children, but children's always pop up in his photographs. And it's so—
they're always there.
Yeah, they really are. And I think because Jim never had children himself, what he did was photograph children in all these different situations where he was, so that he collected his own little family. And that's how he was able to have children.
Yeah, it's great. There's definitely a strong theme that goes throughout his work. A lot of the images that we haven't seen, I've been fortunate to see some that, there is always these little moments where he moves away from the focus of what he's maybe at a gig or at an event to photograph to document, life as we know it, as we see here, but also the children that are around these incredible events that he's photographing. We're also delighted that today we also have some of the proof sheets that these images come from. One thing that stands out in Jim's work when you manage to have a good look at these proof sheets is there really is no bad image in a proof sheet of Jim's work. Bear in mind, we're on film here with completely manual Leica cameras. Every single image I've seen on his proof sheets, contact sheets, they're incredibly sharp with great densities, but more importantly, everyone tells an incredible story. And here we have Jim in the moment of photographing Joan Baez with this march through Newport where they're practicing for heading to Washington, where she's having these, really powerful and deep conversations. And then suddenly, as you see here in these top frames, he's back at the festival doing the day job, takes a few shots, and then he's back on the street again. It's almost like he cloned himself and there was more than one Jim when you look at his contact sheets. It's incredible.
He was just running around and capturing everything. And he was probably going crazy thinking, how am I going to get all this? But he did it. And it's amazing that he was able to. And the march went to Truro Park. That's where this march ended. And in another photograph, we'll see the three, Joan Baez, Cordell, Regan, and James Foreman talking to the crowd after the march, and what they were discussing and talking about. But it's just really, I mean, and again, here you can see in some of the crowd shots as well, that there were blacks and whites together, completely together, and in unity. And the policemen, you can even see, they're there just to make sure there's order, but they weren't there to, you know, take anybody away or arrest them. So it's really kind of incredible.
Yeah, and when you look at the foundation of a lot of jazz music, especially folk music and indeed blues music, you know, there is a lot of it is protest and you know, the storytelling of the times. So it was very appropriate that these two festivals were happening at the moment when this movement was you know, really taking life and taking shape. But again, if you look, folks, closely at these individual images on this proof sheet, you'll see that you could really choose any one of these to tell the story. But I love the fact that the hero of this proof sheet was the one that had, you know, Joan deep in conversation with the leaders of the movement, and this little child up front, which just was very, very much a signature of Jim's. Incredible.
Yeah, yeah.
And nobody's paying attention to Jim. You'll see that throughout. When you look at more proof sheets that we have today, you'll notice that he really was the fly on the wall, the ultimate fly on the wall photojournalist, with, you know, just able to get these incredible stories, be in incredible positions, sometimes on stage, at the edge of stage, but was always able just to, you know, stay out of focus himself and focus on the stories that he wanted to tell. Yeah. Let's look at the next image, which is, as you say, once the march had progressed down to the park and they were, you know, talking to the crowd. Who do we have here in this image?
So you have Joan Baez, then you have Cordell Regan, who is the lead singer of the Freedom Singers, and then you also have James Foreman. And James Foreman was a very important figure in the civil rights movement as well. He basically was the executive secretary of the SNCC, which was Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And he would attend all of these rallies and talk about peaceful protesting and what you could do and how to get other African Americans to sign them up to vote, and freedom of speech, and just a whole lot of different things. So this was where they were, and they were talking about what their plans were for the March on Washington the next month. And one of the things I love about this is that it's these three big figures of the civil rights movement. And again, just to say, Jim had a manual camera with a fixed lens, right? And he's right next to them. He's probably very close because it was a fixed lens, but yet they're completely oblivious to him being there.
He literally must have been squashed against the person you just see at the front of frame here. And not only are they ignoring him, the whole crowd's ignoring him, which is awesome.
I know, they are. And just a little cool aside that with James Foreman, he has his signature blue jean overalls on, and that was kind of his uniform that he would wear and he was known for. And when he would dress up, and when you see him in marches with Martin Luther King Jr. And John Lewis, he's got a white shirt with a tie on, but he still has his blue jeans on top of that. and the reason he wore those, because he wanted he wanted to kind of adopt and symbolize sharecroppers, who really were the African-American hard workers that were doing all this manual labor. And he wanted to really put a spotlight back on them. and saying, you know, we need freedoms, we need to have civil rights. And so that was kind of his signature uniform that he was known for, to really keep that on everybody's mind, that it goes back to a piece of history where, you know, sharecroppers and African Americans were slaves.
Yeah, and something else I love about this image, it'd be very easy, and probably nowadays the media would be looking for the tension, the you know, the less joyful events that happen at protests and that type of stuff. Whereas you look at this image, you look at Joan, you look at the crowd, the gentleman in the crowd with the hat. It's such a joyous moment. Although these people are there to protest and, you know, have such serious, you know, problems in their life, it is such a joyous moment. I just love this image on so many levels.
Yeah.
And we have the proof sheet that goes with this one as well. And something I want to call out in this proof sheet, here we are, here's Jim really focused on, you know, what's happening on this little platform, this stage, these, you know, huge moments in this movement. And then suddenly you can see at the bottom right here, he breaks away because his eye is drawn to a child, but more importantly, the peace symbol that the child's wearing on the necklace. And peace imagery is something that, again, focuses a lot in Jim's, you know, maybe less popular work or less better known work. He really had a thing for capturing the symbolism that was probably not even seen by many people as they wandered around the streets.
Right. And wherever he saw it, we have a book called Peace, and it is of Jim's peace photography. And it just, whenever he saw it, he documented it. So whether it was a necklace or if it was graffiti on a wall or if it was down in the subway station in New York City, he knew that it was a powerful symbol that was going to take on many different meanings. And so he, like we said, with his curious eye, he just captured that and knew that it was going to be historic and tell a story someday. And that's really what photography is, as we said, is storytelling. Absolutely. And that's what I love about Jim's photos and the proof sheets too. It tells a whole story. You can see through this proof sheet, it's like Jim is telling you what he was looking at and what he was trying to capture, much like a musician, you know, when they have a notebook and they write down songs and lyrics, that is their tool to communicate something. And so when you get, you know, photography and music together, I think it's just a very powerful tool. And, you know, again, we're lucky that Jim captured that.
Yeah, one of his incredible skill sets was this ability to change pace and to change his kind of mental focus so quickly between shots, you know, but from being in this, you know, deep, you know, heavy conversation that's happening in the park to suddenly being aware of a peace symbol, to then being back on stage, back at the gig, you know, backstage with, you know, some of the most incredible artists in the world, and just this ability to change pace, to change mental state, but always capturing incredible stories and just always on it when it came to, you know, the technical quality of the image.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting too, because a lot of, not a lot, but some photographers do not like to show their proof sheets because, you know, they're not all technically great and they vary. Whereas Jim always said, yeah, you can look at my proof sheets. I have nothing to hide. And, you know, that was great that Jim was that open about his work and knew that he felt confident enough that he was a great technician, you know, so not only capturing that moment, but technically being able to get it as well.
Yeah. And you mentioned there the piece book that you curated from all his symbolism that he'd photographed. And looking at those images, many of it, as I said earlier, we would walk past on the street and other people would just consider graffiti or, you know, vandalism. But when you look at the way that Jim captured those, you know, pieces of art or those symbols, the storytelling in something inanimate, it was incredible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, the next image we have, if we can call it up.
Yep.
people will be familiar, as we said earlier, with this young gentleman on the right of screen here. Incredible image of Bob Dylan. This again is at the same event, but I think is
This
it
is
a year later?
1964. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about this story.
Well, Bob Dylan now was, everybody knew who he was. So he was always surrounded by crowds of fans, which you can see here. And he's with Len Chandler, who was another protest singer. And he was very involved with the SNCC as well. And he would go to the folk festivals and sing protest songs that really talked about what was going on at that time. And he sang, I've got to find it, Keep On Keepin' On, I think. And the secretary of Martin Luther King Jr. saw that and heard it and fell in love with it so much that it was used, the lyrics, some of his lyrics were used in a speech that Martin Luther King Jr. gave. So it had profound, profound
impact.
Thank you. Because I'm losing my words. It had a big impact. And one of the things is funny aside that we found out as we were posting these to get ready to do the talk the past few days, I got a email from somebody who said the gentleman in the left foreground in front of Len Chandler, that is somebody called, he's known as the Singing Rabbi. And I just thought that was so interesting. And let me get it up because it's so funny. The Singing Rabbi.
Yeah, it was so great that someone saw this image on our social promotion of this talk and recognized somebody in it and felt compelled to reach out to you and give you more background to this story.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, I'll find it and I'll tell you, but it's great because he really was an extraordinary man in his right too. And he, as well as a rabbi, used music as a way to talk to people and bring up different issues. So you have these three just really kind of iconic figures in one frame together. And
yeah, it's incredible that in that 1 year from Newport 63 to a year later in 64, Bob was probably one of the most famous musicians in the world by that time. He couldn't go anywhere without being mobbed by fans, and yet here's these three key iconic gentlemen standing in a crowd, and it's also relaxed. They look so comfortable. The atmosphere, you can just see the atmosphere is so joyous, and Jim's there with his camera just to capture this incredible moment. And it looks like they were probably singing a little song to each other or something at the time.
It might have been, or yeah, exactly. He was just kind of strumming on the guitar and they were humming or whatever, but yeah, they're totally connecting.
Just strumming as they were chatting. It's so relaxed. It's incredible photograph.
Yeah, I found the rabbi's name. His name is Shlomo Carlebach, and he was known as the Singing Rabbi. And he was a religious leader. He was a spiritual leader. He was a composer, and he was a singer. And his roots were in traditional Orthodox yeshivat, but he branched out to create his own style of Hasidic Judaism with a warm and personal interaction and public concerts. And he lived in different cities. He lived in actually Manhattan, he lived in San Francisco, and he lived in Toronto. And then he ended up in Israel. But there was he was the subject of a documentary, of not a documentary, of a musical on Broadway. It was called Soul Doctor in 2013. But I just think that was a very interesting aside.
Absolutely. So much happening in that one photograph. And I think it really encapsulates what Newport was about. Just this huge melting point of, people and spirits. It was just absolutely incredible. And that story just adds that whole other layer and dimension to that image.
Yeah.
So good that they reached out with that. And again, we have the contact sheet, the proof sheet here with, again, just this, you could almost play it like a movie. It's just incredible. Frame after frame is just so good of Bob and Joan and others at the festival that year later. But that one image is incredible.
Yeah, it's cool too, because you can see Jim was on the stage, he was off the stage, he was in the crowd. So again, he was moving all around to capture these pieces of history, which that just doesn't happen today. I mean, again,
No.
the access today is not like that. So you can't be, you know, going on stage and then jumping down and back and forth. I mean, Jim had all access, and that's one of the things that's incredible as well, is that any subject that he photographed, they trusted him.
Yeah.
They completely trusted him. They knew he would not betray that trust, and that's why he was allowed those kind of that access, and also why he captured people. They're completely unaware of him being there, because he became so much of the background that they forgot he was there. He was just
completely accepted by that community as one of their own, and yeah, they just was part of the gang, and therefore they weren't conscious of him constantly being there with their camera. And again, if you scroll through these proof sheets, here he is with, you know, one of the most popular musicians at the time, so much happening. And again, on this proof sheet, he finds the child to add to the story. There's a little bit further down on this proof sheet near the bottom. Bob Dylan's having a conversation Bob Dylan's, there you go, or someone's having a conversation at the back, and there's a little child at the foreground there. Actually, it's not Bob at the back, but he still manages to find a little child in the crowd, and as you say, it was something he was prone to do.
Collect. He was collecting another child for his archive.
Yeah. And some great crowd shots. Again, everybody's so happy and joyous.
Wonderful. But what's fun too is you can see the fashion of the time as well. So, you know, you have the clean cut college white guys with their chinos and their button down shirts. And there you have Bob Dylan, who is all in black, right?
Yeah.
So, but it's interesting as well, because it talks about so many different things during that time that you can see in a photograph.
The expression on that child's face is just priceless. Absolutely priceless. That would such a great moment, and you know, stands the test of time. Incredible. The next shot we have in the collection of 5. We'll move to that one now. Once we've pulled back from this proof sheet a little bit. This is a very different image from what we've been looking at so far. Famous, you know, Jim's famous for capturing great stories of people, but I mentioned earlier, he was never one to walk past or see something symbolic in just a very simple, you know, piece of art or imagery.
With this actually, we're now not at the Newport Folk Festival. We're in Mississippi in 1964. And this was Freedom Summer. So basically, Jim went down in 1964 to Mississippi during that time and photographed everything that was happening. And this is when CORE, that's what this Freedom Now CORE was Congress of Racial Equality. And they were an organization that played a pivotal role for African Americans in the civil rights movement at that time. And if you see, it says underneath that, I don't know if we can zoom in, but it says, if you do not register, you cannot vote. And I mean, again, that's just everything that's happening right now. And what at CORE and SNCC did was they went down to Mississippi and they signed up Blacks to vote, and they taught them how to register and how to teach others, because there was so much voter suppression going on at that time. Again, kind of what's happening right now, and that's why it is so timely. And I think that just that sign, again, it's not a person, but it's a statement, and it's the truth, and it's telling you so much just in that window, you know.
It's a picture of a window with a sign in it, but as you say, the message is as relevant today as it was, 60 years ago, unfortunately. But
Yeah.
yeah, CORE and SNCC, they were, vital at educating communities that were being suppressed and deliberately prevented from understanding how to vote, let alone being able to physically do it. So very, very important organizations, and encapsulated in a photograph of a window. It really is incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. Do we have the proof sheet for this one? I think we do.
Yeah. And while he's there in Mississippi, of course, the community and the people in the community focus so much in his work. Here he is, the world's most iconic musical music photographer, and yet these portraits of these kids are
Amazing.
phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. And the people of that community, and you can just see how encapsulated Jim was. For me, the image there of the kids sitting in the front seat of the car, just even on this contact sheet, this proof sheet that is very simply developed, the quality of that image is just phenomenal.
I know. And I love, if you go down to the next row, there's a little girl, and she's leaning in the window, and she's just absolutely beautiful. Where is she? Well, yes.
There we go.
Whoops, go down. Yeah, right there, where she's leaning in the window with a wreath of, who knows, leaves around her head.
Branches, but,
just the tenderness and the emotion in that photograph is incredible to me. And at the top, it's funny because you almost see two generations there. You have the old man in the top frames, and then you have the children in the lower one. So he's kind of symbolically including all of those different generations together, which is just amazing. And the kids with their bicycles.
He's just hanging out with this community and encapsulating such iconic historical records of the life these people were living at that time, the joy they're having just playing in the street and hanging out in someone's car, and he's taking photographs of them, and then in amongst that captured this really symbolic image of the core symbol in the window, which is just a frame in amongst this street photography, this portrait session. There's just so much happening here, and yet there you have that incredible Freedom Now image right there.
Yeah. And this was also the time when Jim had also photographed Miss Cheney, who was the mother of James Cheney, who of the three, Cheney, Schwimmer, and Goodman were the three SNCC workers that went down to sign up African Americans to vote, and the Ku Klux Klan kidnapped them and then ended up murdering all three. And Jim was there when the FBI came and told Miss Cheney, that your son's body had been found. So this is all part of what was going on. So it was very
incredible
dark
moments.
And sad, but yet Jim also found innocence and happiness, even though it was a very dark period of time. He was able to capture the innocence of the next generation,
and he did it with so much compassion and tenderness, and yet if you knew Jim, most people wouldn't use those words to describe Jim Marshall, right?
No, you wouldn't. Anybody who knew Jim or didn't know him so well. He was very gruff. He had a very gruff exterior, and you would never think that he would just melt at taking pictures of children. It was, and I think it was a part of Jim, and this is part of photography also. It's a window into somebody's soul and what they're thinking, because you would not be able to get these photographs if you were not empathetic, if you were not caring, if you didn't want to, be there and show this. So I think a lot of times Jim didn't show this part of his photography because it was so personal to him, and because it did show a vulnerability in him that I think if people criticized that, he would have been devastated. So rather than even go there, he didn't show them. And so I'm really happy that we're able to do this today and share it with people, so you see a different side of Jim.
Yeah, he probably didn't want to break that, you know, gruff persona he had when he was, you know, at live gigs and, you know, hanging out with all the big stars. You know, he didn't want to, you know, give them a peek behind the curtain that, you know, he really was this tender soul. You know?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And then we have one final image, I believe, in the collection. Yeah. This is such a powerful image.
It really is.
There's a very small element of this image which makes it a complete story. But tell us a little bit more about this image.
This again is Mississippi, 1964. And this is a African-American woman, and the pin, if you read it, it says "One Man, One Vote," FDP, and that was the Free Democratic Party, which was actually created in 1964 in Mississippi during the Civil Rights Movement. And it was organized by African-Americans and whites to challenge the establishment, the established power of the Mississippi Democratic Party, because they did not allow blacks as part of that party. So this was established to try and change that. And at that period in time, the African Americans made up 40% of the state population. So it was absolutely shameful that it was made up of only whites, and that you know, African Americans were not part of that voice. But that did change. I mean, that's was the whole point. And so again, this just is so timely, and it speaks to so much what that's going on today. One man, one vote. You know, that's what it's about. Everybody has a say, and everybody has the power to do something.
Yeah. Without the pin, this would just be an incredibly powerful, beautiful portrait of that moment in time. Right. But just capturing that pin in this story just takes it to a whole other level and makes it so iconic as an image of the time. Just incredibly captured by Jim.
Yeah, and I think the proof sheet, if we look at the proof sheet of this, you can see a lot of other things that were going on as well. So in here we have, you know, a bunch of hero shots, actually.
Yeah. So much in one sheet here.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. So you can see in 10A, frame 10A, that was the symbol for core, where you have a white hand and a black hand shaking together. Yeah.
Just painted on the door of some establishment there, and he's captured.
No, that was actually the office. That was.
It was at their office. Yeah. And so then that's incredible. All the activity that was happening around that office, which, you know, was important work, intense work, and yet, you know, many of these are just incredible portraits in such a, you know, an intense, you know, important place, but beautifully captured.
Well, and like in the frame of the woman and the guy, that's 20A. You know, here you have an interracial couple, obviously. Yep. So again, I mean, this
hugely
is
symbolic.
Hugely symbolic, and especially at that time, that was really daring to be in Mississippi at that time and have an interracial couple. I mean, that's incredible.
But the way that's captured, the storytelling there, the connection she has with her partner, the position of her hand, you know, this would have been a fleeting moment for Jim as he's moving around this, but man, he nailed the composition on this. It's incredible.
He really did. Yeah. And then if you go, I think there's a African-American young guy with a hat on, which was talks about freedom. Yeah, there he is. Yeah. At the end, he's outlined in the yellow. And that's, you know, the Freedom Ride. That's when the, you know, everybody, the African Americans went down and whites to Mississippi to really teach everybody activism and make sure people were signed up to vote. Such a timely, really timely photograph too.
Yeah. These proof sheets, were these printed at the time by Jim, or were these done by you?
These are his vintage.
These are his. So these are his selections. These are his hero shots.
Yeah. And Jim, like a lot of photographers, you know, they would circle different ones and then he'd write on them, you know, I want an 8x10, because Jim, in the very beginning, Jim did develop and print his own photographs, but he hated doing it, but he was actually really good.
Yeah.
But anybody who knew Jim, he had ADD and he could not sit still. And so the minute he had enough money to get somebody else to develop and print his photographs, he did. But it was always easy for them because technically they were so good, right?
Yeah. I mean, these images, sorry, Antonio, if you can go back along to the end of this row, there's the first image of the woman holding the flowers that Jim has marked as a hero shot. If you scroll along to the end, I think it's number 7. Yeah, look how delicate that image is and how incredibly well captured with, you know, 1960s technology. You know?
I know, and I think actually those are the hands of the woman with the button. And those hands, Jim told me about the hands with the flowers, that was a woman of, her parents were former slaves. And so this was her when she went and voted and she put flowers in her hands, and Jim captured that moment, which is so powerful.
Yeah. Incredibly powerful moment, incredibly well captured. And, you know, just even in that contact sheet there, looks, you know, incredible
and to
quality.
Use hands as a symbol, or as you're making a portrait of somebody of freedom, basically, right? Your right to vote. And he used her hands as the subject, which I think is incredible.
Yeah, the power to vote is in your own hands, and you have the freedom to do it. It's very symbolic.
Yeah.
So those are the 5 images that you've chosen for this very special project. So let's talk about what people can do, how people can get these images. So these 5 images you're actually about to release for sale, correct?
Today, yes.
Today is the day.
Yeah.
So these 5 images, which have never been for sale before, or I believe will never be for sale again, is that correct?
Correct. Yep. And they haven't been printed. We are offering them as 8x10s. They will be stamped on the back with a letter of provenance. Mm-hmm. They're $250 each. And part of the proceeds from the sale will go to the Jim Marshall Fellowship at UC Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism.
Yeah. We'll talk about the fellowship in a moment, but if people, you know, if you're watching this and you're interested in these prints, which is a, you know, really once in a lifetime opportunity to get, you know, these prints, it's all being managed by Leica Gallery LA, and those details are on screen at the moment. If you get in touch with Paris there, I believe, at the gallery, then they will certainly look after you if you want to grab yourself a piece of history.
Yes. And they are also, each one of them is offered as a one-off as a 30x40. So what's incredible about that is that at a 30x40 size, you feel like you're marching there with Joan Baez. You feel like you're on stage with Joan Baez, and, you know, you're right there with Bob Dylan. So those will only be offered as well as one, and those are available at, you know, Leica LA as well. Yeah,
a single 30x40 of each of these, a one-of-a-kind image. I'd highly encourage you to go check it out at Leica Gallery LA. So we briefly mentioned that, you know, part of the proceeds of the sale of these prints will go to the Jim Marshall Fellowship at UC Berkeley. So tell us a little bit about what the fellowship does and who it supports there.
Sure. And why it's so cool to be at UC Berkeley is because UC Berkeley really was where the free speech movement started on the campus of UC Berkeley during 1964 and 65. So it just seems so perfect to have. We started this fellowship 5 years ago, the Jim Marshall Fellowship in Journalism. And it's really to encourage a whole new generation of photojournalists and storytellers. And that's why it's so important to me to keep this funded and to keep, you know, this scholarship around for future generations of storytellers. Especially today, like I said, like we are encountering so many different issues that happened 60 years ago. That you thought we would have gotten past, but we haven't, and history repeats itself. But photography is such a powerful tool, as we said, and Jim used his camera to tell a story and shine a light on different issues and different people who are not getting the attention they deserved. And so I think to have a whole new generation of these chroniclers in Jim's name is really, really important. And the two, now we're showing the two recipients this year.
Yep, there's two each year, is that correct? 2 each year,
and these are the two, and they're really incredible themselves. Let me get up the info on both of them, if I have it. Both of them actually were, their families have been immigrants. So Jim was an immigrant himself. His parents were from, he would say, Assyria. That's ironic.
That's right.
And so Jim also felt a lot like an outsider when he was growing up because he wasn't blonde and blue-eyed. And so it's just paying it forward to have Jim fund, you know, these future photojournalists who are immigrants themselves and have experienced, you know, prejudices against them because of the way they look, and they are taking their camera to then show what they see and to shine a light on important, you know, that we all live together. And the U.S. is made up of immigrants. It really is.
It's such a lovely circle to close when, especially with UC Berkeley, as you say, the start of, you know, the freedom movement, the fact that it's a place where you can study to be a photojournalist.
Yes.
The fact that, you know, the fellowship supports, you know, these people become the future storytellers when we probably need them again most. It really is just a lovely circle to close and a great fellowship to support. Was Jim aware there was going to be a fellowship at any point, or is this something that came after his death?
Yeah, it came after his death. But Jim always encouraged younger photojournalists. They would call him up on his home phone and say, Jim, can I come and show you my photographs? And he said, absolutely, for sure. And so they would come and show him their portfolios, and Jim was never negative. He was always very encouraging, even if he didn't think it was the greatest portfolio. And once I saw him do this, somebody was shooting live music and they weren't that great, but rather than saying that, he would say, you know, you're so good at photographing the crowds. He goes, I think you should really concentrate on that. So he would never discourage anybody. So it was just part of who Jim was. And I'm happy to continue his legacy in his name at UC Berkeley.
It's a great way to honor a great man. And we're delighted that you have put in the effort to keep Jim's memory alive in many ways, with the fellowship, with the wonderful book that you have sitting behind you there, Pride of Place. Show me the picture. Show me the picture. It's an incredible book. If you get an opportunity to get that book, it's available, I think, in the US at the moment. Yeah,
all over
the
world. Yeah.
I can testify to that. I have a wonderful copy of it sitting here on the shelf behind me. It's a wonderful read. Thanks, Antonio, for sharing some details there about where you can find out a little bit more information about Jim Marshall Photo on Instagram. There's a link there to where you can get the book on Amazon. Of course, check out the Leica Gallery LA. We have a couple of questions, Antonio, if we're okay for time, we'll do a very couple of quick questions. I know we're at the top of the hour, but there's always a few technical questions that people love to know about. about Jim. Nate Love asks, who was Jim's favorite photographer and why? Did he have a favorite himself?
He did. He had a couple favorite ones, but the one that he really loved to talk about was Robert Capa. And, you know, Capa was a war photographer. And in some ways, you know, that's what Jim, like I said, he photographed things that were also very hard to look at, that people didn't like to confront. And I think that's why he loved Robert Capa, is because they were hard to look at photographs, but we needed to, and they really symbolized and showed pieces of history, which is what Jim does as well. You know, he's showing pieces of history through his photography. So Robert Capa was the big guy that he loved. Yeah.
And if you've ever seen images of Jim Marshall, we're all aware that he was very proud to wear the Leica around his neck. In fact, in some instances, 4 or 5 Leicas around his neck. But the next question is about lenses. What was Jim's preference for lenses? Did he have a favorite lens?
His 2 favorite lenses were a 50 millimeter and a 35 millimeter lens. And he loved the 50 millimeter because it made him get up close to the subject, which you could see in all the photographs that we showed. Unlike, you know, a zoom lens where you could be far away and zoom in, Jim was right there in their face, but yet they didn't know he was there. So it was incredible. It really, I think technically, it's a good, he said if he were to teach a photography class, the 2 lenses that people had to have were a 50 millimeter and a 35.
Yeah, and I think that shows in a lot of those images we just looked at, especially the one where he's on stage with Joan Baez and literally right up against people. Really, really intimate shot. We'll do a couple more, Antonio, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
People, I got to jump in though and say people have been asking in the chat as well. Amelia, how are the images printed for this print cell? Are they inkjet, gelatin silver? I think a lot of people want to know about that.
Oh, of course.
Let you take over again, Alastair.
They're archival pigment print photo prints, but the paper that we print them on, master printer, is Seth Dickerman here in San Francisco, and they're printed from Jim's original 35 millimeter scans. And so we basically get what Jim would have printed, the quality, because I make sure that since Jim is not alive anymore, I make sure that everything we print as the estate and offer as a limited edition estate print is the way Jim would have printed it when he was alive, to really honor his technical part of that. So they're printed here in San Francisco. And they actually really do look like a silver gelatin print. I mean, it's pretty amazing, the different papers that you can use these days. But, you know, you will be able to see, because Jim is known for his punchy, dark blacks and whites. And with these, they're going to just pop right out.
Yeah, real quality archival legacy prints. Really, really incredible. There's always a question about what film stock Jim used. Someone said, did Jim use Tri-X?
Yes.
Was it ASA 400? Yes, it was.
Yes, it was. It was Tri-X 400. Yeah. That was it. And then he used, for color, he used Kodachrome, mostly Kodachrome. So yeah, but no, he loved the Tri-X 400 because he could, you know, you could do so much with it.
Yeah. Here's an interesting question. I think we'll finish on this one. Something I'd like to know myself. Peter asks, was Jim formally trained photographer or was he self-taught?
Jim was self-taught, and that's a great question. Jim bought his first Leica in 1959 and just took it with him through North Beach in San Francisco and just started photographing. So he really learned what worked and what didn't. And so by doing that, it became a part of Jim, an extension of him. And so he knew, he could look at the day and see the exact light that was happening. He knew what f-stop, what film speed, everything to use, and it would come out technically. And that was because he taught himself, and it was through trial and error that he learned that. And I also think Jim, you know, he had an eye, and that's something that you cannot teach somebody. That is something that I think truly comes from within, that people have or they don't. No matter how technically good the photograph is, if the image isn't powerful, and if it's not engaging, it's not going to affect people, right? And so that's something that you can't teach, and that's a real gift that Jim had.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, you mentioned there he bought his first Leica in what did you say, 50 something?
59.
59.
1959. Yeah.
Did he keep that Leica with him his whole career, or?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
We have about 30 Leicas and 50 lenses.
Yeah, incredible.
Wow.
Incredible little museum in its own
Yeah.
right.
If that gear could tell stories.
Yeah, I bet. The places those cameras have been.
Yeah, exactly.
Listen, this has been a huge honor for me. I mean, not only is Jim, you know, an incredible hero of mine, the people he photographed, the stories he told, they're all heroes of mine, and such important stories. Amelia, thank you so much for taking the reins and creating this incredible project to showcase this other side of Jim, these incredible moments that are so relevant right now. It's been an absolute pleasure and an honor for me. Thank you so much for having this conversation.
Oh, absolutely. And thank you, Alastair. It's been wonderful. And thank you to Leica. So, you know,
Absolutely.
Leica, SmugMug, and Flickr all partnered on this project with us. And I'm very thankful, because basically we're remembering a great photographer and honoring him. And I'm very thankful for that. And hopefully this will inspire a whole new generation of photojournalists, which is what we really need.
Yep. Inspire them and support them.
Yeah. So thank you guys for allowing us to do this and share this part of Jim.
That's great. As I say, a huge personal honor, but you know, SmugMug and Flickr, we're all about, you know, helping people tell stories photographically. And yeah, thank you to Leica and yourself for asking us to be part of this conversation. And I hope everybody watching has really enjoyed this and had a real taste of Jim's life and the work that he created, you know, through his curiosity. And you just never know where the music is going to take you.
Exactly.
Well said. Well said. And thank you both again for your time. I think I echo everyone in the chat who's sharing their praise. This was just a joy to listen in on and hear these stories and really dive in. I think seeing contact prints and contact sheets is such a unique perspective that we don't always get to see, and especially for such an amazing and legendary photographer. So again, thank you to you both. This has been so special and so great, and what a great deep dive into these images. And I encourage anyone out there that has any interest, definitely get in contact with the Leica Gallery LA, because you can own some pieces of history. So that's pretty special.
Yeah.
So without further ado, then take care, everyone. Stay safe. Alastair, Amelia, thank you again.
Thanks,
Thanks, Antonio.
Okay.
Catch you all next time on Leica Conversations.